Welcome, everybody, to Legal Tech Week for July 14th, 2023. This is the show where we sit around and talk about the top stories in legal tech and legal innovation from the past week. And got plenty to talk about today. And I am Bob Ambrogi. I serve as the moderator here, and I write a blog called Law Sites and have a podcast called Law Next. And our panelists today, starting with Joe Patrice.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Joe Patrice from Above the Law and the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. I am happy to be here. As usual, I don't really have anything clever to say, I just realized. So whatever. There's a thunderstorm coming, so I might get a cool backdrop here.
Caught you off guard there. And from all the way across the pond in the UK, Caroline Hill.
Oh, I went off mute as soon as you went all the way. Yeah. Hi, Caroline Hill, editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider. Is it really me, or am I an AI simulated journalist? Which is really me.
Yeah. And from all the way in Chicago, Victor Lee.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Lee. I am assistant managing editor for the ABA Journal. Yeah, I don't know whether to talk about weather or talk about AI. I'm a little confused here. Well, how about we get an AI person to talk to us about weather? I'm sure that's coming up at some point.
Sounds good. And all the way in, Stephanie, I have no idea. Where are you? In Brooklyn or something? I don't
Brooklyn,
even know where
Yep, Brooklyn, way down south. No. Stephanie Wilkins, editor-in-chief of Legal Tech News at ALM.
Oh. And just in the nick of time, from I don't know where you are either, Jean.
Virginia.
You're in Virginia, right? Okay, Jean O'Grady.
It's funny. This was a test. I couldn't join the legal tech roundtable unless I could get my camera to work today, so I passed. Yes, so I am the editor and publisher of Dewey B Strategic, which covers legal information, knowledge management, and anything else I'm interested in.
We would have been happy to have your voice, even if we couldn't have gotten your video.
Thank you, Bob.
That would have been okay. And I know a couple of us anyway. Jean, I assume you'll be at AALL, and I know Stephanie and I will be at AALL. So that's starting, the American Association of Law Libraries, starting in Boston tomorrow. To me, it kind of sucks to have it in Boston because it's like my hometown, and I feel like I don't have as many good excuses to stay out and party all night.
Yeah, well, you'll get if you've gotten your invites, I'm sure.
I haven't gotten a ton of invites. Jean, you get all the good parties, I bet. But
but I don't think they're as wild as the ILTA parties or the legal tech parties.
Well, it used to be that the fast case suite filled that void.
Yes.
Poor Stephanie is not going to get to experience the fast case suite.
I don't think there's going to be a VLEX suite.
Not that I've heard of. Not that I've heard about. But, well, we got a couple of stories this week about how AI threatens certain jobs. And given that AALL is tomorrow, Jean, maybe we should start with your story on that.
Yeah, so I really gave Ken Crutchfield, who's in charge of legal at Wolters Kluwer, who actually is a great promoter of the legal information profession. I was really pissed off at the results from the survey that they.
It was also an Above the Law survey too, so you're going to yell at Joe Patrice too.
Right. So Above the Law and Wolters Kluwer did a survey I think it was in March, generative AI in the law, where could it all be headed? And what kind of work is going to go away? And number one was document review by lawyers. So, okay, it's not all lawyer jobs, it's specific lawyer jobs. Number two was librarians. Now, how long have I been hearing that? At least 20 years. And Jeff Brandt picked it up this morning and said, no, Jean, I heard it in it's 30 years. I heard it back in 1985. So, I mean, I have to say, if there's in many ways, librarians have always, I say this all the time, they have been at the forefront of database creation, taxonomy, all sorts of things, and yet we're always being written out. And I think that the obvious way to me that librarians will continue to have a role is as what's now being called a prompt engineer, because what are librarians really good at? Crafting questions, answering questions, knowing how to extract answers from large amounts of data and knowing what goes wrong with data. And so to me, it's so obvious that there are going to be, well, the profession, like many professions, the low-level work will go away. The high and new kinds of high-level work will evolve. So that was my whole point.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. I actually, for some reason, was enlisted to write a chapter a few years ago in a book called Law Librarianship in the Age of AI, and I wrote the concluding chapter on the future of AI in law libraries. And basically, that was my whole argument in the chapter, was that AI is an opportunity for law librarians, and that it's an opportunity for them to really stand out in their organizations, whether it's a law firm or government or academic setting, for so many reasons. I mean, the ones you mentioned, also just sort of in the role of, again, helping to evaluate and vet these
Right.
products, where they've really played a crucial role already in legal technology. So yeah, I thought that survey was really got it wrong on that. But hey, it was just a survey, so I guess you say don't shoot the messenger. It wasn't Wolters Kluwer's fault.
Right.
It was the fault of the
It was
respondents.
Joe's fault.
It was my fault. Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing. I was like, hey, what this really shows, and it goes to, you were hearing that back in the 80s too, like, it's a survey. It means this is what people think. They happen to be wrong, but it shows how consistently wrong they've been over time as far as where law librarians are. And, I mean, in fairness, when I first started out at the firm, I didn't grasp all the things law librarians could even do. I just thought that they were there to make sure that room stayed clean, and everything got put in the right pocket parts or whatever. Right. But as over time, you learn that they're actually very, very good at crafting research requests, knowing where things are. And like that is a thing that comes with time, but it's still something that people often overlook, which is why these survey results did not actually surprise me, whether, they're not right, but it was what I figured people would say.
And
right.
I mean, go ahead. I completely agree with you all. And I thought it was interesting because I've been having this conversation internally with a colleague of mine a lot, because I went to Clock and there were people up on stage just blatantly saying, generative AI is going to be the death of KM. And I was sort of like, that's a really bold statement. And it got a lot of side eye, but there's definitely this camp. And then it was followed by this survey. And I've been having that conversation internally where I agree with you, where I think it just revitalizes the career and sort of points it in a new direction. Because I think also a lot of people don't understand law librarians. Like Joe was saying, when I was in the law firm, our law librarian was the most magic person in the firm. Like I went to her for everything. She could, and I don't know why that would be any different now that we're using AI as opposed to books or whatever we had in the interim then. So I'm curious to see what they talk about at AALL, because there does seem to be this wide story being told out there that this is the death of KM, and I think it's so wrong.
It'd be interesting to see about training, like whether, obviously they will have to stay ahead of what's happening. And Jean, your point about prompt engineering, there's an opportunity. It'd be interesting. I'll be really fascinated to hear from you guys after AALL about where they sit, in terms of what they should be doing right now in order to stay ahead of everything, and which obviously law librarians have always done. And it'd be interesting to see how they need to position themselves to they're always valuable, but to make sure that they stay as valuable as they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. The other point I thought about the survey was really about marketing, and we've seen all the large vendors go out and they just have to plant a flag in the AI territory, even if they have no product to offer. It's like, my product AI, my brand AI, my brand AI. It's like everybody just needs to be out there.
Yeah, Gene, I was trying to remember.
We always
go ahead, Victor.
Sorry. We always talk about like, so this technology is going to be the end of this industry. This technology is going to be the end of this industry. And look, travel agents, everyone thought, Orbitz and all those Travelocity, all those sites are going to destroy them. And a lot of them did go out of business, but there's still uses for travel agents. Like, I actually had to use one last year. I couldn't believe it. I was just like, travel agents, they're still around. But no, like they actually do things that a lot of people accustomed to doing. Like we had a really complicated situation where we were bringing our son home from Taiwan, and so you can't buy a one-way ticket for kids under the age of 5, 6 years old because they think you're trafficking a kid. So
Right.
then you have to like go through. So you can't do it online, and you can't do it over the phone. So you have to go through an agent who's trusted by the agencies to then deal with them and do it on their own. So we had no idea that this was even going to happen. And so, look, for any industry, like the people who can embrace the technology and use it to make themselves more valuable and more more relevant will succeed. And the ones who are just content to just sit back and do the bare minimum and not do and not adapt, they're going to get wiped out, just like various other agencies.
Yeah, Gene, I wanted to, several years ago at I think the Special Law Libraries program that precedes AALL, you chaired a day-long program, I think, talking about kind of the future of the profession, as I recall, or maybe it was a half day, I don't know.
Yeah.
But what I remember is that something that kept coming up that day was this question of whether we need to change or essentially rebrand what we call law librarians, and whether that's part of the misunderstanding about the role of that profession in today's world. I mean, what do you think about that?
There's no question, and I am almost sorry that I caved and I used the word law librarian, because I don't generally use it, because an Australian librarian I knew said to me once, and I think this sums it up. She said, "Does your title open doors or close doors?" And I think that is the problem with the term librarian, because it is so deeply associated with clerical work and books and pocket parts. And, so that's why, like on my blog, I refer to myself as a knowledge strategist, which is something I made up and actually, that's actually, you've just reminded me, Bob, that's exactly why I started my blog. Because the purpose of my blog was to talk about new roles for librarians, to raise the profile and to change the definition. And unfortunately, several years ago, AALL had a vote. They were going to change the name, or there was a vote on changing the name of the organization to the Association of Legal Information Professionals, I believe. And it was voted down. And I was a big advocate of changing the name. So I think, unfortunately, and I think especially because AAL has a lot of academic librarians, there are certain pockets where the notion of a library isn't, still exists, but it doesn't exist in that way in law firms, and probably not in corporations either. We're a series of services. We touch not just the practice of law, but the business of law. And I think that's part of the problem.
Isn't that where the rise of, KM, knowledge management, came from, to sort of?
Yes, librarians have been doing KM since
Right.
catalogs were invented. Catalogs are knowledge management systems.
But like the KM sounds more sophisticated and doesn't have
Yes.
like the dusty book connotation of
Yes.
librarian. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's about whatever we do, whatever level we get to, however we do it, KM and librarians, etc., are about helping us to do it better and more efficiently. And there's always going to be a pressure on time, and there's always going to be someone who does it wrong, and there's always going to be like, whatever it looks like, there's always going to be people who are guiding us and saying, right, there's always going to be what's next, and that's kind of where they sit, right? Like, are you doing it accurately? Are you doing it according to the firm's protocol? Are you following these rules? And I don't think it's going to matter what it is we're using, but they're going to have that role, whatever that looks like, I think.
And is the data reliable? Is the source reliable? I mean, that is never going to go away.
Yeah. And are you looking in the right places for
Right.
it?
Oh
Right.
gosh, yeah. And I mean, this there's a startup that's now launched search across the whole of the DMS, and I said to them, oh wow, that's how do you curate that, right? How do you make sure that that's and they've got some impressive people on board, and I've been speaking to a couple of the DM providers, and they're going, wow, this is interesting, but it's like you're gonna need people to just go, wow, okay, we just need somebody to be in control of that,
Right. I would have to say that system was not designed by a librarian, because the first thing you need to do is get rid of the junk, because DMSs are full of junk that nobody wants to see when they run a search. There's the
and just searching, they're going, oh yeah, sorry, yeah, they're going, you just search across it in natural language and find whatever you want, and I'm just like,
nice idea.
just like, how do you know it's what you actually want? Oh no, because we know, and actually, it's deep judge. They sort of revealed this new knowledge search this week. It's just like, wow, you're going to need somebody to take control of that, and
So on that test of whether your title opens doors or closes doors, I was at a conference this week of law professors and law faculty and deans, and I mentioned that I described myself as a blogger, and I noticed that there was one person particularly giving me the cold shoulder, and I Googled his name and found that he had been raked through the coals of Above the Law a few times, and so probably wasn't too friendly to me. I'll have to fill Joe in on that offline sometime, but I'm not sure blogger is a door opening title either. But there was also another story this week. Speaking of Above the Law, in which yet another doomsayer was predicting AI's effect on the legal profession. Joe?
Yeah, so what's annoying to me about this is it wasn't just a like random doomsayer, it was the OECD, who's theoretically an organization that has some reputable cachet out there, like who's supposed to be spending its time really looking at the international economic market and making policy recommendations. And they put out a report where they said that AI is going to kill a bunch of jobs, which sure, I'm sure on some level that's true. But they went further. I personally assume for the purpose of getting more headlines for their report, they went further to say that actually the highly skilled jobs like lawyers are going to be most hit by AI, that more than any other entry-level thing, it's going to be lawyers who are replaced because AI is going to start making decisions for us, and AI's output is indistinguishable from what lawyers create. First of all, nobody was apparently paying attention to the ChatGPT thing that we talked about for weeks, right? Don't know how that escaped them before they hit send on this report. But I decided to really dig into the report and figure out what evidence do these people even pretend to cite for this idea that it's going to come after lawyers more. And ultimately, when I dug into the full report instead of just the top line, they cite one article that doesn't even conclude that. And they say that article raises that some lawyers are worried about it. And that's it. That's the only support they have for the idea that it's going to affect lawyers more. And all I could think is this goes back exactly to the survey issue. When people subjectively say they're worried, that is not a conclusion. That is how they feel. That is not reality. I'm so annoyed at this report. I don't understand how anybody thought it was okay, and then how it got reprinted by other people like uncritically, like I saw it in major news outlets. Really annoying. Anyway, so that was my rant of the day. No, it's not coming for highly skilled people.
Who really needs evidence? I mean, the logic is lawyers generate content, GPT generates content, so therefore one replaces the other.
Yeah.
Even OpenAI, just as one, are working on what we've got now. They've got like a year ahead, right? So Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, spoke at Clifford Chance, and he said, what we're dealing with is different to what they're working on right now. I think, even if, just throwing it out there, it would to do a ton of stuff completely accurately that lawyers do now, right? There will be a multitude. There's so many different ways of looking at it. Like from an access to justice point, we can service potentially so many more people, right? Like there could be, I just think that it's so like quite narrow-minded to think, oh, the end of lawyers, when actually lawyers have proven themselves to be very resilient, they're very necessary, that, it's just not that one-dimensional. Like even if it were to be able to replicate a whole ton of stuff, that means maybe that a whole group of people who can't currently get access to justice might be able to, and then lawyers could be doing something different. I just don't think that it's a sensible sort of the end of lawyers conversation just in that one-dimensional way. It's just not smart.
Yeah, I mean, when you think that 95% of the population has no legal representation, what are they thinking?
And I hope that it will get more accurate, and I hope that a ton more people will be able to be using GPT or whatever it might be to help. I think that would be an absolutely brilliant result. And actually, I think, but I mean, obviously we're not there yet. But and then lawyers will be doing there'll be different. I think there's going to be changes, right? I don't think that we can say that things are going to be exactly the same. I think it's going to change. So we will talk about this too much, but it will change a ton of stuff. But lawyers will be doing something different. It will look different, probably, but they will not be out of business, I don't believe.
I mean, sorry. I don't know. I mean, like, I spoke with for an upcoming podcast episode. I spoke with John Tredenick, who is big e-discovery guy, and now he's doing searches and whatnot. And he was talking about the case. Okay, yeah, like, because we talked about this issue about AI replacing lawyers and whatnot. And he goes, well, for like, and this is no different from what a lot of people have been saying. It's just like for certain types of lawyers, yeah, like it could definitely replace them, like discovery lawyers, contract lawyers, those first pass lawyers who sit in a room and like go through documents and whatnot. Yeah, it could definitely go through them. It could definitely it could definitely get rid of them or make them obsolete. And as far as like would that be unfortunate? Yeah, of course it would be, because anytime you eliminate jobs or replace humans and whatnot, then that's not a good thing. But it might also force it might also force some of these lawyers who maybe might have just been content to just do e-discovery for just to pay the bills and whatnot. It might actually allow them to then go on to do other things. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily bought that argument, because just based on what I've seen from like reporting on this stuff over the years, and also from recruiters and whatnot, once you kind of get labeled as a contract attorney, it's hard to kind of transition to become like a associate, or get hired to like be like a general practice lawyer, unless you go out on your own or you go to like a much smaller firm or whatnot. But but if it forces some of these people to then go and try for it, then I guess it might not necessarily be a bad thing, because it'll allow them like to be able to do the kind of things that they were trained to do from law school and from and whatnot, why they wanted to go be lawyers in the first place. But yeah, it's definitely a complicated question as far as like who's going to be affected by it, how people are going to be affected by it and whatnot. But the idea is just going to wipe out the whole industry, that's absurd.
Well, and I'll add. Well, hold on, I got to add, since I read this, there's one clarification that's worth noting, which is that there is something to be said for the contract attorney thing, but this article really leans into it'll be the higher level decision making that gets replaced, which that's the part that got me.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go to. And I don't think it's necessarily the profession. It's the work being carried out, the judgment aspect of what lawyers do. Even the people that are making the most advanced AI for legal are not saying it replaces human judgment. It replaces the other things. It replaces the roles where there isn't a lot of contract attorneying. There's minimal judgment involved. A lot of it is, the other aspects of it. And so the concept that it's going to replace the actual decision makers and the high level work, to me, that's absurd. It will definitely replace displace a number of tasks, but the profession as a whole and like the core intellectual concept of what lawyers do in an ideal world, that's what it's not touching.
Yeah. It was the way in which it couched its argument in it will be able to handle the judgment calls. And that just really, that was where I lost it. And I thought about the computer introduction of computer stuff, and like, oh well, the industry is really gonna take a hit when we aren't billing all this time being in libraries and stuff. And it's like, well, no, the computer research happened, and then we read more cases. And I think that's gonna keep happening. Like, lawyers will find a way. I mean, but lawyers are going to find a way to churn the bill. There will be, if this gets faster and gets more data processed quicker, they'll take on another case, or they'll find a way to drag this out. Like there's no end to how lawyers can figure out how to get paid.
Well, and to a degree, I was on a panel a few months back at a firm talking about, AI, and the question came up, like, will this replace associates? Will it whatever? And I'm just like, raise your hand if you feel like you always have all the time you need to get your work done. Like, not even close. Like, I mean, especially like Ed and Big Law, there's not a time I couldn't have used like 3 extra days to finish a project. You just have to do it when it's done. And like, so if something used to take you 6 hours and now it takes you 1, maybe that's great. It doesn't mean you're not doing work. You can actually get to more work or do the work you're doing better and maybe not spend 25 hours in a weekend at the office.
Well, the big AI fail was all caused because the lawyers never went and read the cases, which is AI is not, no technology says that lawyers don't have to actually understand the precedent they're citing.
We've talked about it before, but I mean, I think so much of this fear is really around not that AI is going to replace them, but that AI is going to reduce their billable hours. And
Yeah.
it's so much of the fear comes down to the whole billable hour model and the need, it drives the need for a greater discussion. And we've talked about this before around alternative forms of billing for legal services, whether that's value billing or project-based billing or whatever it is. Hourly billing just doesn't work in an AI world.
And it's not just from the, billing clients to justify your fees or whatever, but it bleeds into so much of how the business of law works and the structure of them. So, because like you said, even how are you going to prove your worth as an associate or hit your billable hour target to get your bonus? Like it has to go deeper than just what you're billing the clients. It's a really entrenched structure that even when you're building out an AFA, you're doing the math in your head of like, oh, well, I think it's going to take us about this amount of hours. So this is a fair amount. It's such the baseline math of how it works. So it's a really complicated discussion that needs to be taken on, I think.
And maybe the whole concept of things taking longer being worth more, like it needs to be changed to being done quicker is worth more. Like I find it the concept of that you should spend more time doing something is, because obviously the billable hour has got this, we've got this concept of, if you do more time on it, that's a more valuable thing. We perhaps need to rethink the whole thing for the client. If it's done quicker, then it should be worth more. I know certainly within the higher, like, so I think I've talked about this before, but when you get to the really high end private equity deals, that they will pay huge amounts of money for something to get done quicker. So they're not necessarily fearful of tech. Actually, if they can say to their big private equity client, we can get you to acquire this company far quicker than the next firm, that's worth more. And the whole thing needs to be perhaps rethought, which is definitely easier said than done.
Yeah, because the highest billers could actually charge double if they can get you the answer twice as fast.
If they sold it that way,
some of their fees. Yeah.
That's the way. I mean, that's the way it's just crazy the way that I'm going to spend loads. And any of us who've used a lawyer just, I would, it's just makes nonsensical in any normal world, right? Do it quicker. Well, I would just want to pay the same, but it's worth more if it's quick, if it's faster, potentially.
Well, there's a couple of stories this week around the topic of fundraising in the legal tech world, and one of them is kind of a broad story. One of them is a pretty specific one. But Caroline, you've got some interesting, kind of an interesting overview of what's going on in that area.
Yeah. So this was I asked Raymond Bleed from Legal Complex to run me. He's obviously a bit of a data wizard, and I said, could you compare the first, because obviously now we're at the half year, I said, could you compare this half of the year to last half in terms of funding, and the figures that he came up with were that deal funding as opposed to debt deals were down by 43% this half, so in the first half of 2023. So it was over 3 billion last year, and it's below 2 billion this year. He does include tax, which I don't know why we have to include tax, but anyway, we do include tax, not just legal tech deals. But obviously the funding, it probably doesn't come as a huge surprise that deals are down. Obviously I've heard from lots of different conversations about M&A deals. We know M&A deals are down, but that was quite a drop. I was perhaps surprised by the almost half, like almost 50% down on this time last year. Debt deals were up. That again, from when you can't get growth equity, you go to debt. So debt was up. He kind of viewed that as quite a positive thing because for startups, for example, you don't have the same loss of control or as you do with VC. So there's a sort of upside to that. But those kind of deals were up dramatically. But and then the only caveat, so June was worse than all of the other stats. I think it was down. June was down 76% on June last year in terms of funding deals. But then the kind of slight potential improvement, the sort of caveat as well, is that obviously we've got generative AI deals coming down the track, which might turn things around. But it was pretty bleak, to be honest with you, the figures.
Yeah, it's kind of consistent with what it's been seeming like. I mean, there hasn't been as much, sort of big VC news this year. I don't have any data at all to substantiate this, but there does seem to be an increasing activity at kind of more the lower stage, like sort of seed rounds and stuff, and a lot of smaller tech companies getting some money in their pockets. But I mean, that tends to generally be, south of $5 million or something, if even that, a couple of $1 million. But
Yeah.
I think there's, and of course, then there's the M&A side of it, like, the case text deal and that kind of thing. But
Yeah. I mean, this not surprising with obviously inflation is. I think this is it's interesting because it's global. I mean, these were global figures, not just UK. So, but inflation is high, interest rates are high. You can understand the caution. It's and it's just we've been here before. We're all old enough. We've been we've been through this cycle of it's just what happens, right? Corporate goes down, litigation goes up. I haven't actually heard that many great litigation stories apart from everyone suing OpenAI or in the sort of Gen AI space. Obviously, there's lots of excitement on that front.
right.
But that's why I guess some people are speculating that there's, sort of this Gen AI bubble in funding. Because I was talking to the patented AI guy that made LLM Shield, and he had a 4 million pre-seed round, which is even he was like, and he's been a tech entrepreneur for 20 years, and he's like, that's insane. I've never seen a pre-seed that level, and even he was like, maybe it's the bubble, but I'm going to take it now while I have it. But it is. I really think it is the earlier rounds we're seeing it a lot more in.
Yeah, I think there's there's quite a few people pointing that in the chat, and actually that was borne out in the research that it was the later stage companies that were struggling to get funding.
And as Dan O'Day
I
points
know,
out,
right?
not all companies did.
That's
He
what
was
made me
bucking the
laugh.
trend there at ECFX. Yeah.
I'd like to know if someone posted something about illegal prompts. Can anybody comment on that? I don't know what an illegal prompt is.
So this was, I said
It's
to
in the
put it
chat.
yeah, I said
You
to
don't-
put it in.
You don't want, hey, you don't want to know.
Okay. Never mind.
I assume
it was
it
get-
means I assume it means like the jailbreak prompts where you can like get ChatGPT to violate its own internal rules. Like there's been a lot of them. There was like the Dan one. There's like, I'm assuming the jailbreaks is what that means.
It said, so the person who posted it, just to post some panelists, said, I asked what an illegal prompt is, and the group played with the term, landing on prompting that results in phishing or spamming, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. And right,
So-
also to Brian's comment, yes, of course, the slowdown in funding is not unique to legal, and
Yeah, of
often you
course.
find the funding cycles in legal tech have kind of trailed some of the cycles in other verticals, although that's less so these days, I think, than in the past. I don't know if you guys I get a lot of calls from like people working at VC firms who like want to pick my brain about different things. And I've been getting a lot of calls lately just about the good old fashioned practice management world. It seems like there's, I don't know, brewing potential interest among some of the VCs in that space, the space that, my case and Clio and others occupy. And curious whether we'll see some new activity in that area, as opposed to some of the sexier ones like AI or contract lifecycle management. Nothing is more sexy than contract lifecycle management, right?
Well, and to go back, just to go full circle on the death of KM by AI at Clock, it was all the CLM people saying that AI was going to kill knowledge management and it was going to supercharge CLM to almost take over half of what you could get from KM. Didn't make sense, but they were the biggest advocate, maybe because, there hasn't been as much attention on CLM lately. I don't know.
All right, well, so that's sort of the big picture of financing, but then there's a story in which maybe one AI co-founder wishes he was maybe had some more insightful perspective on the financing scene. Stephanie, you've got that story.
Yeah, this complaint's a doozy. It has fraud, it has embezzlement, it has I can't even tell you all the stuff. But so the one of the two founders of Stability AI, who has now gone into Stable Diffusion, and they're now known for all of the art generation stuff. They originally started, they were trying to do the early generative AI stuff, like to do COVID projects and whatever, and they didn't really pan out. And that turns out it's also alleged because this dude was siphoning funds out to do other stuff on the side and pay for lavish apartments. But so his co-founder was like, this guy has ruined his reputation, he's tanked us, I want out of this. At the time of the valuation, he had 1 million shares, I think it was, that they built out. He had 15% of the company, and his co-founder bought him out for $100. $100, or not more zeros on that. Turns out a couple months later, they get $4 million in seed funding, and or $100 million, and then they're now a unicorn, right? And the whole time while he was telling this guy, we're worthless, I'll buy you out for $100, he was already siphoning money away from, allegedly, from the COVID projects to build what is now Stable Diffusion, getting VCs interested in it, building up this whole business plan, kept it all from his partner, bought him out for $100, and then turned it into a unicorn and ran away with all the money. And so now the partner that got bought out for $100 is suing him for fraud and lots of other things.
It's such a bizarre story.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading the story and feeling like I don't know whether to be sympathetic or to this guy or whether he just made a really bad mistake.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive that this other dude was building the whole AI art generator on the side with nobody knowing.
Yeah, I guess.
Because it came out in a couple of months. It wasn't a matter of, oh, we just refocused and came up a couple of years later. It was like within months they were valued at $1 billion.
So the one who was suing didn't even know that this was happening at all and had no inkling of the
Nope.
art generator thing?
Nope,
Wow.
He knew the COVID related project had failed, and he thought it was like this guy's bad leadership, and he was doing things with money, and he heard the rumors about him stealing from past partners, and there's a lot of embezzlement things. He's like, I'm out. This guy, he's taking money, he can't even do a project, he can't follow it through, and all this other stuff was going on the side.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel if someone offers you like $100 for like a 15% stake, you might as well just keep it, right? I mean, just in the hopes that it's going to bounce back and like go back up. I mean, right? You might as well just keep it, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you would have been on the hook for anything else, but yeah, I mean, come on.
Yeah. Oh, and apparently there's like an evidence spoliation issue about the guy. He thought he was going to be sued, so he deleted all of their WhatsApp communications. It's like an issue spotting exercise for like law school or the bar exam.
Yeah, that's what it sounds
really
like.
has everything. Yeah.
Oh man, you just set me up for the next gen bar review.
I was just gonna say, is this gonna
Next
be
gen
on
bar
that
exam rather, not bar review.
Didn't even know it, but there you go.
I wrote a whole article on why the next gen bar review or bar exam questions are stupid and absolutely do nothing to solve the problems of the bar exam. So check that out if you care about bar exam stuff. Less legal techie.
Yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
even looked into what the next gen bar exam actually is. Like just the whole name of it has me just turned off.
Well, they're increasing the amount to which the questions test skills rather than doctrinal knowledge. And by testing skills, what they mean is, here's the fact pattern. If you were a researching associate, what would you find the answer to this doctrinal question to be? It's like they couch it as though like you're role playing in research, but it doesn't actually make you do the research. So it actually doesn't do any of the skill testing that they claim they are doing. They just like rewrite the questions it's like cosplaying as research. It's real bad.
It's like storytelling. Like let's imitate storytelling. I don't know. That's weird.
So yeah. I mean, this week they released for the first time they released this sort of sample what these questions might look like, and immediately I think that they came out. It's like Tuesday afternoon, Monday afternoon, and I know that Gabe Tenenbaum and Suffolk immediately fed them into GPT, and GPT immediately scored 100% on the questions. So there you go. There, I mean, it's not strictly legal tech, but it is legal innovation because it is an attempt to to reform the bar exam and to make it more reflective of kind of the, the skills that lawyers actually need to have, and to address some of the criticisms around the fact that the bar exam is old fashioned. But I was at, as I said earlier, at this conference of law faculty and law school people earlier this week. And it was kind of fascinating being there as this came out, because they're all really concerned about how they teach to this, or do they teach to this? And part of the interesting, it de-emphasizes some of what have been the core subjects. Is it property's not on there or something? I forget. Or secure transactions aren't on there anymore, I think, or some stuff like that. And it puts greater emphasis on some sort of maybe soft skills, things like negotiation, in theory, and client counseling, stuff like that. And so if at law schools, they're like, sort of furiously convening these faculty committees to talk about how do we need to change our curriculum. And even worse, I mean, once this next gen exam comes out, it still has to be adopted on a state by state basis. So they don't actually know which states will be using that exam, I guess, versus what, the existing exam or a prior exam or some other exam. And so they don't even know, like if you have students from multiple states, you might have to be preparing students for multiple different kinds of bar exam options. So really kind of a fascinating dilemma, I guess, for law schools, and trying to figure out how are we teaching students around this.
But
It seems like, I mean, the setup of it seems like it's more like a law school exam in general, with the hypos, and then you pick the issues that are relevant, and rather than writing essays or writing, like how it applies, you just pick A, B, or C or whatever. I mean, so I guess in some ways it's easier, some ways it's harder, but it seems like it's more kind of like what a traditional law school exam is. Yeah, which I guess it's better in some ways, but yeah, it kind of brings up a lot of the same issues. It's sort of like, well, does this really prepare people to practice, or really prepare people for for work?
And you really want a lawyer that doesn't know property issues. I mean, it seems like, shouldn't the soft skills be treated sort of like ethics? Like you take that separately. I don't see why you have to take away core expertise and knowledge, and you can do both. It's not binary.
I go the other way. I say you take away the core knowledge and just do the soft skills. And here's what I mean by that. It strikes me that if I were, and I'm not, but if I were a 40 Act lawyer, why the hell am I cramming my head full of a bunch of Fourth Amendment standards and criminal procedure garbage, right? Like if I'm not going to, if I'm a property lawyer,
represent a shark.
I mean, like, yeah, but I'm not. I'm gonna go to Sullivan and Cromwell, and I'm gonna do banking. That's the thing. And so I think that the right answer is to not have the bar exam handle that core stuff, to instead do kind of the general skills stuff, and then really lean on, if it's going to be done at all, and then really lean on, maybe you have a setup for people to get certificates in specific areas. Maybe, although personally, I think the right answer is junk this test entirely, and finally, then we would have leverage to really crack down on the ABA. Would finally have leverage here. Yeah, this is exciting for the ABA. They would actually really have the leverage to crack down on accreditation and say, okay, so now your diploma really has to mean something. So we're going to have real standards, and not that they don't try to have real standards now, but anytime they crack down on somebody, they get sued and have to give up because Paul Clement sues them for making a diploma mill law school feel bad. But if we're in a situation where they really are, that is really what the gatekeeping device is, those lawsuits wouldn't be nearly as powerful.
Yeah, but what's going to happen to all the graduates who don't become associates at fancy law firms and have to go out on their own and don't have, don't know what the elements of a will are? That's not fair either.
Well, but you
wouldn't hire somebody
classic law school argument is we're teaching you to think like a lawyer.
The reputation of the profession.
But you wouldn't hire somebody who just like the last time they did a will, or the last time they looked at the contract was for the bar exam. You're not going to hire that lawyer. You're going to hire someone who practices in the area. So like, I never understood the whole concept of once you pass the bar, you're eligible to practice any kind of law. I'm like, well, why? Like you would never hire, if you wanted to do a will, you would never hire somebody who, like, the last time they studied trust and estates was in law school. That just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, isn't the basic law school premise that they're teaching you to think like a lawyer, not to have all the knowledge at your fingertips that lawyers need to have?
I like Dan O'Day's suggestion that for every practice area, there's something like the patent bar exam. I like that idea. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. Also notably, I don't think I realized the extent to which this is happening, but I guess there are a number of states now that are looking at getting rid of the bar exam entirely, or providing an alternative method of admission in addition to the bar exam. And I think it was Oregon it's either already implemented this or is pretty far ahead on this, where they're going to have a couple of different routes to bar admission, including essentially doing an internship kind of a thing, and having to go take a sort of almost like a doctoral exam or something at some point after you've done that for a while.
Yeah, some states have diploma privilege for like people that go to law school in their state. I think Wisconsin does, and I think Utah, I think maybe.
They recently did that. I think during COVID, the Utah one happened.
I like the comment, I couldn't have written a contract to sell my dog when I graduated. That was me. I do think that the softer skills is interesting. So I'm hosting a webinar next week, and we're talking about the digital first law firm, and what that looks like. And this is relevant to what people are taught, because we were saying about it, the digital first law firm is not about automating people out of the equation, and actually, in fact, it's about cutting out the crap, so that then you can spend more time in a people role, like doing the stuff that's important. And the EQ probably is going to be increasingly important, and we're pretty bad at that. And at law school, you can't teach necessarily EQ, but I think teaching people how to actually practice as well. I agree with Jean. I don't think that you can send people out without having any of the knowledge, but perhaps a bit more focus on how to be, especially with lawyers who are highly insecure. We've been proven to have certain characteristics which makes us terrible in many senses. Perhaps focusing on some of those more soft skills might prepare people more for the future that we're talking about.
The other topic really kind of relevant to what we've been talking about today that came up at this conference is that this is like an unconference where people just kind of posted topics, and we went into small rooms and talked about them. So I put one up on, like, should law schools be teaching more about the implications of generative AI for the legal profession or something like that, thinking nobody would come to my discussion. And a whole bunch of people came, and all what they wanted to know is how can they tell when their students are using GPT to write papers? I mean, their focus is entirely misguided. Now, I shouldn't overgeneralize like that. Not all of them, but for some of the people there, their focus is still on this fear factor around generative AI, and they're struggling to kind of figure out, do they embrace it? Do they say this is the future, this is the present, and we need to teach around it, or embrace it and teach around it, or do we somehow try and keep it out of law school and keep it out of students' papers and whatever else? I mean, I think the consensus certainly was that they all understand that there's really no standing in the way of it. I mean, I think one of them even said this would have been like, telling students 30 years ago not to use Westlaw. It wouldn't have made any sense, but they are really struggling with how they should go forward around it. I thought that was a really interesting discussion.
It's a real struggle from a learning. So my son, who's 14, he's been doing his French homework, and he said ChatGPT is amazing at French. He's like, and he's suddenly getting all these like good, and I'm just like, this is disaster, because when you come to do your exam, your teacher's going to think you're going to get an A, and actually you just don't know what you're doing. And so it's really it is genuinely, for pupils and for teachers, it's genuinely problematic. But of course students are going to use it, but there's going to come a point perhaps when we suddenly realize the implications of the fact that people have been using something and paying no attention. I would have done it, and then they're going to do their exam. I mean, perhaps I'm being a doomsayer, but I don't know how they get on top of it though, because as far as I can tell, that there was all this chat in the beginning about, oh, you can tell if it's been written by ChatGPT through these different things, but I don't think you can. Does anyone, I don't think that's right.
Somebody just posted on that.
Yeah. The
Okay.
detectors, I mean, detectors exist, but they're not great.
They're not great, no.
Really, no.
And
And
was-
technically, I think it's parlay JPT, right? Like that's how we do it.
What?
trying to say
Well,
ChatGPT in French,
because it's French, yeah.
which clearly
Joe
wasn't.
Joe
French,
just
but
had
I speak French, but I
ChatGPT write
understood
his
it.
French exam for him.
No,
Oh,
what I
I-
did, what I did is dig back into 5 years of completely wasted my life where I learned French for 5 years and remember none of this. So I had to like really dig deep.
Claude speak French.
Detectors, like,
No, see, we used to cheat the old-fashioned way by using Cliff Notes or Monarch Notes. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, where did that go? You know,
That's exactly
Movies.
There have always been ways students can cheat. There's always been whatever. You can't block people from accessing AI. You just can't. And you just have to figure out how to work with it. And you might not know the answer overnight, but you can't. I mean, this isn't, genie is not going back in the bottle. You're gonna have to figure out how to work around it.
To be fair, you could have just asked Google, right? Like you can, it's not going to do as good a job of writing an essay, but you know, it's not the same. But there's always, but yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Dan had a hilarious comment. If there's no grammatical errors, it's a good clue. Well, the spelling is correct. It's a good clue.
Yeah. Or if it's actually good French, just full stop. They're like,
They could have just used Grammarly and not GPT.
Don't get me started on Grammarly.
Yeah, I know it. All right. Well, last but not least, we have a good old-fashioned ethics opinion that has absolutely nothing to do with GPT.
Who's
yeah, I
is it?
was, I was.
It's
I
Victor's.
mean, I wanted to change things up a little bit. I'm a little GPT'd out, but although I guess there is some. No, actually not real. Who knows? Maybe at some point the ethics opinions will start being written by GPT, which would be incredibly ironic. But yeah,
How do we know they're not already being?
Well, well, so the ABA released a formal opinion this week talking about ethics for lawyers who want to share offices. I mean, this is obviously becoming more of a thing with people decreasing their real estate footprints, people moving into like hoteling arrangements, things like that. Splitting room with other lawyers to save money and whatnot. And so a lot of the things in the opinion, like a lot of ABA ethics opinions, a lot of the stuff was pretty basic and like things that if you think about it, they really should be no-brainers. But the very fact that they had to like issue the opinion means that probably some people were doing this, so you never know. But it's just very basic stuff. Like if you're going to use if you're going to use like a hoteling arrangement, whatnot, you have to make sure everybody's on the same page. You have to make sure there's walls up in case there's cases of clients that could potentially be in conflict. You have to make sure you safeguard your data. You have to make sure you keep things confidential. Like, again, all very basic stuff, but sometimes you have to drill that stuff home, and you have to release an opinion so that then you can at least say that you put people on notice for it. But ultimately it was all pretty sensible stuff, and again, things that I'm sure most conscientious lawyers already knew. But so that's pretty much what it was.
Could you address Guy's question of what is an office?
It's a state of mind. Now, well, here I'll refer you to ChatGPT then. You can.
Is anyone in New York? Because I hear New York's they're pushing for 4 days in the office in New York.
And London.
There's like these 3 big law firms that have gone to 4 days in the office now. Yeah.
There's a massive in the city over here. I was in for a meeting and it was just packed. It was like it felt busier than pre-COVID, and some of the big firms are obviously pushing for 4 days. My question was, this is a really random one, you'll be surprised to hear. got 4 minutes. So so people who are working from home, right? There was this thing about climate change in the UK in the immediate future. I don't mean like long term. I mean like this summer is going to be boiling hot. And people are working from home. It's already been like bakingly hot, so you can't concentrate. So you're going to have people who are working from home who are potentially going to be thinking about alternatives and perhaps they won't have an office to go back to because perhaps they won't be from one of the firms that are trying to encourage them to go back, and they're going to be, so to Victor's point, you might have people trying to come up with these creatives. I don't know, I'm just envisioning, but it's going to be absolutely boiling, and we certainly are not set up for that kind of heat wave. It's going to be, so I just think it's going to be really interesting as to how that impacts on people working from home, because I know for me, for one, I'm not a lawyer anymore, but it's going to be, if it's the temperatures that they say it's going to be later in the summer, it's going to be a nightmare working from home. And I just thought that was quite an interesting take on it, the kind of working from home ideal.
Well, yeah, it was funny. Like when I was younger, because my parents, like growing up, we didn't have air conditioning. So whenever we get really, really hot in the summertime, my parents would just take us to like a movie or take us to like, the mall or take us grocery shopping just to like get us an AC for like a long time. And so half the time my dad would just be at his office because that's the only place that had central air. So yeah, I never thought about that because I mean, here now, I mean, in the US, I mean, most people have some kind of central air in their homes, I guess. At least, yeah. But yeah, I never thought of that aspect of it because yeah, I mean, if I'm living in a sweatbox, and concentrate. Yeah, I'm going to the office. I mean,
so Victor, your story actually could be really relevant because you could have a whole bunch of lawyers working in the freezer aisle of the supermarket, like with a.
Yeah, but
well, there was a Married with Children episode where they moved into the supermarket because they couldn't afford obviously any kind of air conditioning.
Yeah, so right. There's going to be no confidentiality. It'll be like, I want to sit next to the frozen peas. You can barge, right? Like,
I saw the news today that Burger King is providing free ice cream for dogs to help them beat the heat. Maybe we could campaign for something similar for lawyers.
In the UK, right?
Like, it depends on how you have to get to the office though, because like I have window air conditioners in New York City, which is most common, and I'm required to go to the office 3 days a week. It's great that they have air conditioning, but by the time I go on the New York City subway and I am wet and so miserable, I don't care that they have air conditioning. I would rather have never left my apartment.
Yeah, that's true. Those pits in the summertime are like those, like so the ones that are like way down underground. Like, oh, those are the worst.
Ooh.
Well, just as this conversation is warming up, I hate to say it's time to chill it down and wrap it up for the day. But I look forward to seeing some of you folks over the next few days in Boston. And we'll be back next week, hopefully with a recap of some of what we saw at AALL. And hope everybody has a cool and wonderful weekend. See you next week.
Great.
Yeah, everyone. Thanks. Bye.